and good morning. Why don't we all stand up for a minute and just sort of fill your body with some air and stretch. We've been sitting for a bit. Maybe lean to one side and lean to the other. We are corporeal beings after all. Great. Well, I think the word that's been used the most this morning is excited. And I hope you all are getting excited. The real excitement begins after my talk. I'm the stuffy academic from the US who's supposed to provide lots of academic context for what will be happening over the next couple of days. So I could stand here and talk about the 1 billion who have no access to clean water, or the 2.6 billion who have no access to adequate sanitation, or the 65 out of 104 million absentees of school children who are women. I could talk about the 10% increase in female literacy that will lead to a 10% increase in life expectancy, or an increase in GDP. But I'm not going to talk about all those numbers. Instead, I'm going to start with a story about a snowflake. You see, a bird is sitting in a tree watching the snow fall, and a mouse joins him. And the bird asks the mouse, "Mouse, what do you suppose the weight of a snowflake is?" And the mouse says, "Nothing more than nothing." And the bird, having nothing better to do, begins to count. Count the snowflakes that falls on the branch of the tree that the bird is perched. And a little beyond 3 million, at the 3 million plus snowflake, the branch breaks. And the bird says to the mouse, "That last snowflake, it weighed just the right amount." You all, this is really hard for me to do because I'm used to walking and teaching with a whiteboard and it's not working for me. You all are that final snowflake. And I am honored and humbled to be here today to talk with you for a few minutes this morning to help frame your next couple of days together, because I believe that the people in this room will change the world. I'll say it again, because I mean it. The people in this world will change. The people in this room will change the world. Take a minute and look at the people around you. Look into the faces next to you, in front of you, behind you. No, really, do it. Look at each other. These people are going to change the world because these people are just the right snowflake. When I was asked to speak this morning, I sort of thought to myself, what could I possibly have to offer? You see me perhaps as the dean from an Ivy League school in the States. I've come to understand how people see that identity before them. But I wanted to start this morning with sharing with you a little bit about me, because I'm going to cover 3 ideas this morning that I think you need to hold in your mind as you think about the projects and the changes that you will engage in as the leaders you are to become. And the first of those ideas is biography. Biography is crucially important as an internal activity to understand oneself, and as an external activity to understand those you hope to engage in your cause. My biography begins on a farm in upstate New York, where I was the 5th generation oldest son of a farming family. Humble origins. I was a child in the US who benefited from free lunch and free breakfast provided by the government. There were no books in my house. The only reading material in my house was a tattered, incomplete set of 1954 National Geographic magazines, where I thought the places portrayed in those pages were as real as Disney, not a place I could actually go and be. For me, college was beyond any horizon I had for myself. It was not something discussed in my family. It was not something discussed at my school. It was not something part of my future. Fortunately, I'm pretty large, and I'm fairly strong, which made me a pretty good athlete. And the colleges came knocking. And so I went off to college, not knowing what college was, to play football. That first year in college, I discovered a wondrous thing: the world of ideas. Ideas are imbued with a power, a special power, to help us see the world differently than the way we experience it every single day, to help us see the possibilities for a different world in the future, to help us understand the world today in the context of the past. I studied lots of ideas in college. One of the most powerful readings I did was a reading by an American scholar, Bell Hooks, in which she says, "I came to theory, or ideas, to make sense of the pain." That was a very pithy thought in my formative years. But I grew frustrated in college, very frustrated, because all of these ideas, as wondrous as they were totally divorced from action. You see, the world of higher education in the United States and in many places in the world becomes an ivory tower, becomes a place where we talk about ideas and we insulate ourselves from the world around us. We insulate ourselves from taking action. We insulate ourselves from the difficult work of changing the world. And that was tremendously frustrating to me. So I decided to try and make a career out of changing that. I went off to graduate school, I finished my PhD, and went into the faculty. I landed in an institution in Maine, which is in the northeastern part of the United States, an institution in whose charter was language about serving the indigenous population of Native Americans. 2 reservations not 3 miles from campus, and of the total population of the university, 3 Native students were enrolled at the time. Well, how could this be? How could it be that we have these ideas built into our charter, and yet there are only 3 students enrolled? So I spent a year knocking on the doors on the reservations to try and learn from the indigenous communities why they were not enrolling at the university. They were completing high school. They were qualified to enroll at the university. I got nowhere, because at that moment, I was the university. So I decided to try and make change in another way, to use the mechanisms of the university itself. And I started a course. As I thought about what to call this course and how to frame this course, I thought about what would be a provocative title, what would awaken my colleagues to the reality that's before them, the water within which they swam as fish and did not even realize they were swimming. So I titled the course Native American Holocaust. And I made the argument in the syllabus for this course that what Native Americans have suffered across North America is indeed genocide and Holocaust. A local news reporter came to campus when he heard about this and wrote a story for the local newspaper, and it had become quite a story in the local community. But I pushed forward, determined to teach this course. And on the first day of the course, as I was handing out the syllabus to my students, I heard a knock on my classroom door. That knock turned out to be the knock of the Grand Chief of the Wolastoqey people, the native population of northern Maine. And he asked if he could sit through that first class to check out what this white professor was thinking about when he titled the course Native American Holocaust. The Grand Chief's name is Dan. He's one of my best friends today. Dan sat through every course for the entire semester. He engaged with the students at every point, and he brought to life in a very real way the abstract ideas that we were thinking about, reading about, and talking about, and challenged us to think about what actions we were willing to take to make the change. Out of that experience came a series of reconciliation circles, a traditional healing practice that Native communities have done for millennia with the university administration. Through that process, we ended up changing policy. We ended up changing services. And I'm happy to say today, about 20 years later, the university enrolls 75 Native students, has a Native Studies Center, teaches the Native language at the university, and one of my former students runs that center. I moved on from there to thinking about Indigenous people more broadly and spent some time taking my students to Chiapas, Mexico, to Zapatista communities, to think about what autonomy means, and to think about what wisdom lies within communities. One of the most powerful pieces I learned there was that the Zapatistas have a really interesting model for autonomous development. When an NGO shows up in the community and wants to do a water project or a sanitation project or an education project, the governing council says, no thanks. But if we go to our communities and our communities believe that this is a good idea and they each nominate a promoter from their communities, we will send those promoters to you, you can train them, and then they can do the project. It's about community control and autonomy. I moved on from there to working with the Aymaran people in Bolivia just prior to the election of Evo, thinking about how their cultural heritage can be an asset, an organizing principle around which they could begin to build a political movement that eventually led to the first indigenous president in Latin America. What I learned across all of these experiences was that the translation of ideas into action and the reflection of that action back on the creation of new ideas is the work of leaders. The translation work that you will do is the work of leaders. It's not the work of academics. It's not the work of practitioners necessarily. It's the work of leaders who bridge the academics and the practitioners. What I learned in those experiences was that a key piece of leadership comes in four folds. One is empathy. I learned in those experiences to listen carefully to the way the world looks from another's perspective and to feel what that other perspective is like. I learned humility, to know what I don't know. I learned reflection, to think about that humility, to think about that empathy, and what I could learn from those two things. And lastly, I learned courage to act, the decisive action that is so key a pillar for tGELF. Acting against the status quo is most often what leadership is about. So since that time, I have framed my journey around listening to those who need change, magnifying the voice and empowering the choice of those who need change, connecting the insight of those who need change to the knowledge that is in the academy, with an aim towards policy, changing policy for sustainability. That's a little bit of my biography. What I'd like you to do now, for just a moment, is think to yourself about your biography. What are the key learnings in your biography that you bring to this moment? Just take a second and think about 2 or 3 of the key learnings in your biography? So I hear some really interesting biographies being shared. And hopefully, in this moment of reflection, you have learned not only the importance of your biography, but the importance of the biography of the person sitting next to you that you're sharing with. These biographies make us who we are. They are sources of learning, and we need to be thinking about them introspectively, even as we think about the biographies of others we want to pull into our causes. Second lesson, history, historical context. The historical context creates the current order. Everything around us is the culmination of the history that came before it. Creates the current moment. It also creates the present possibilities to pivot to a new history. All of the leaders that you think about as important leaders had a particular way of thinking about history. They had an acute awareness of how history created the moment in which they found themselves. And because of that, could see the moments of opportunity to pivot. Evil leaders like Hitler, good leaders like Gandhiji. Hitler had an acute understanding of the history of the First World War and the consequences for the German psyche. He knew in that moment he could capitalize on that history to push forward his diabolical plan. In my country, Dr. King had an acute understanding of the history of race, of the moment in time when he could move forward with the civil rights movement. A moment created by the anti-war moment, a moment created by college students from the North going south for a year through the Freedom Summer, registering people to vote. He knew, he had an acute understanding of history, that there was an opportunity to be had in that moment. Lincoln, Mandela, name a leader. Look into their understanding, and they will show you that they understand history. Our moment, I think, has at least 3 unique aspects. The moment in which you have the opportunity to change the world. The first unique aspect to our historical moment, I believe, is that we have the opportunity to shift from how to will. We know how to eliminate extreme poverty. We know how to educate all the world's children. We know how to improve population health. These are not difficult questions anymore. We actually know how to do these things. The real question is, do we have the will to do them? And your generation is going to answer that question. Not mine, not Mr. Kemka's. Your generation will have to answer that question. Global Citizen may be part of that answer. Number 2, we are globally interconnected in a way we have never been before as a human family. Over the past several weeks, I delivered an address at Stanford. I delivered an address in Sweden where I was accompanying some of my students. I spent a brief vacation in Iceland with my children. Now I'm in Delhi. Tomorrow I'm meeting one of my alums who happens to be working in Delhi. The world is completely interconnected now. I hope to stay in touch with many of you after this event in an interconnected way. That interconnectivity is not only a good. Just as Mr. Kemke said when he talked about the branch of his tree that is around security, global security, that interconnectivity also presents enormous new challenges. Disease can spread much more easily across the world. Terrorism and other ills. But it also holds within it the opportunity to fully realize the human family, to fully realize that the fortunes of a child born in poverty on the other side of the globe are intimately connected to my future as a person in the US, and vice versa. Number 3, and this is perhaps, I think, the most compelling and urgent historical moment for your generation. I tell my students, if you want to be assured of a job, if you want a guaranteed job for the rest of your life, then go into some aspect of global climate change adaptation, because it's going to fundamentally remake the world. Global climate change is going to remake social geographies, physical geographies, and political geographies. It's going to remake our understanding of water, our understanding of energy, our understanding of the planet. I have no doubt about this. Over the last year, I was in 2 very different places in the world where I've seen this already start to happen. As I just mentioned, I was in Iceland over the past few weeks with my children, and we were at the foot of the largest glacier in Europe. We were on a small boat riding up to the face of the glacier, which is 300 meters high, and my daughter, quite naively, asked the boat captain, "Do you enjoy your job?" And the boat captain was in sort of a script all along, talking about the glacier, talking about the wonders of the glacier, and his affect was sort of in tour guide mode. And at the hearing of this question, he fundamentally changed. His demeanor became dour. He became slightly depressed. And he didn't quite know how to answer my daughter. And then when he mustered the energy, he said to her, "You know, this business of taking people to the edge of the glacier, this business has only become possible because of global climate change. This business has made possible that I can now afford to send my children any place in the world to go to school. So economically, it's been good for me and my country. But in 10 years, there will be no glacier." And that was his sadness, fundamentally reshaping the world. Last summer, I was also in Ghana, in northern Ghana and southern Burkina Faso. I was working for an NGO, helping them figure out how to tap into the knowledge that's present in universities to bring to bear on the change projects they're working on. And there I worked with some farmers who shared with me that the growing season has changed from 4 months to 5 weeks. It's going to be a region of famine this year. They won't have enough food. That's global climate change in a real way. It will reshape the world. My historical context, I'm at an Ivy League institution that was founded on the wealth of the slave trade. The Brown brothers made their money in the triangle trade with slavery. I'm at an Ivy institution that has thrown its doors open over the past 10 years with need-blind acceptance, a more diversified student body than any of the other Ivies, diversified by economics, by race and ethnicity, by international and national, by any measure. I'm at an Ivy that has tremendous power to influence and shape American higher education. I'm at a historical moment when American higher education is under attack for relevance. There are serious questions being asked in the US whether American higher education is indeed relevant anymore. I'm also at a historical moment when inequality in my country is at its highest ever, and when mobilization is moving quickly to try and remedy that through Black Lives Matter and other social movements. That historical context places me at a moment of opportunity to use the power of Brown, an Ivy League institution with that history and the openness to change, to transform American higher education. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I'd like you to take a moment again and think to yourself, what is your historical moment? What is your historical context? What historical opportunity do you have before you? In a small way, in some personal, passionate commitment that you may have to change the world? Or in a large way, in some larger project perhaps you're involved in through tGELF or with some other NGO? Think for a moment about your historical context. So we have biography and we have historical context. As you do the work that you will do over the next couple of days, I hope you will be thinking about biography and historical context. And I'm going to add a third as I finish. The third piece to be thinking about is society. Biography, history, society. What I mean by society is both the structure of society, the way we organize our food system, the way we organize our health system, the way we organize cities and rural areas, the way we organize the structure of society in families, in education units, the military, the police, the structures of society. But I am also talking about culture, the values, attitudes, and beliefs that we hold, that we learn from our parents and our grandparents. Perhaps we develop through a program like tGELF in the school system. The structure and culture of society shapes our behavior, but it also shapes our perspective, the way that we see the world. I'll give you three examples perhaps. So the Sami are the indigenous people of northern Scandinavia, right? When they look out the window and there's white stuff falling from the sky, what do you suppose they call it? Anybody? Snow, right? Of course, it's snow. I might say, well, maybe it's sleet, because I have a second word for the same stuff, right? But they have 37 or 38 different words that describe 37 or 38 different types of snow. Their perspective is fundamentally different than yours or mine about what that white stuff is. I'll give you another example. An indigenous people in the Amazon make a hallucinogenic called ayahuasca. This is a hallucinogenic that's used in ritual rites. It is made by a particular combination of a fern and a root. Now this fern and this root are a fern and a root in a family of ferns and roots that to the trained botanist's eye are indistinguishable from the other ferns and the other roots in the same family. In fact, you need a microscope to tell the difference between root and fern in the family of root and the family of ferns. But this indigenous people has figured out that this one root out of 15 and this one fern out of 20 that are virtually identical when put in a particular combination create this hallucinogenic. My friend who's an anthropologist, Wade, says to the elder of the tribe, in particular about the root, how do you tell the difference between the root that works and the 14 other roots that don't work when I, a trained American anthropologist, ethnobotanist, cannot see the difference? And the elder says, what are you, stupid? You come outside on the night of a full moon and the root that is the proper root sings in a particular key. And that's how you know it's the right root. Different reality, different perspective. Society shapes the way we behave and the way we see the world around us. It is important to understand that so that you can see beyond your own society, beyond your own structure, beyond your own culture, and so that you can understand the structure and culture of those you want to pull into your cause. I'll return to Ghana for the third example, where the nonprofit is working to reduce infant mortality in rural communities in northern Ghana, where all other efforts had failed for the past 15 years. This NGO decided to do something novel, to listen first and act second. So they went into the communities and they listened carefully to how birthing was happening, and they began to understand that the traditional birthing attendants, these are elder women in the communities, are more, in fact, than just birthing attendants. They're actually the most influential health-related person in the community. And they began to understand that the only way they were going to make change in these communities was to validate and work in and through the culture of the community. And so instead of trying to replace the birth attendants, they began to valorize the birth attendants, to reinforce the role birth attendants played in the community, and in so doing earn the trust of the birth attendants. After they had the trust of the birth attendants, they could begin transitioning birth attendants from their primary role being attending those births in the homes, in the communities, to being the facilitator that connects the pregnant woman to the hospital for delivery, that is the intermediary between the woman and the modern doctor, that then monitors over the period of a month the number of births that are happening in the community and in the hospital, and records it on a public display in the community for all to see. By getting inside of the society and utilizing the cultural assets that were already present, infant mortality dropped precipitously. Society. My society is Brown. I return to Brown as the Ivy League institution. It is an interesting Ivy League institution. It's the only Ivy League institution in the US that has an open curriculum, no requirements, virtually no requirements. It's known as the progressive Ivy League in the States, the place where the best and brightest come because they want to change the world. And yet, it is an American higher education institution, disconnecting knowledge from action, an ivory tower in many ways. Our new president, who took over a few years ago, said she wants to change that. She's an economist. All of her research has been used for public policy change. So she wrote a strategic plan for the university in which a central component is engaged scholarship. And then she came and recruited me, because she saw that I'd spent my career trying to bridge ideas and action. If we're successful over the next 10 years, Brown will become a beacon that paves the way to change American higher education, to bridge ideas and action, to interrupt the current epistemology of higher education that says faculty are experts and should be insulated from the realities around them, and replaces that with an epistemology that says faculty are one piece of a knowledge system that involves the community solving challenges. So take a second. You know the drill. Think about your society. What are the structures and culture that you need to be thinking about that have shaped your perspective and that shaped the perspective of those you want to bring into your movement? Think about that and talk with your neighbor for just a second. So I was sitting talking with a colleague of mine about these three themes: biography, history, and society. My colleague's name is Raj Davasagayam. He's a professor of management. And we were lamenting together how neither his children nor mine have a real and felt connection to the type of childhood we both grew up in. He, as an immigrant to the US, though he's brought his teenage children back to India several times, struggles to help them understand what it was like for him to grow up in India. I too, now as a secure upper middle class professional with a national reputation at an Ivy League institution, have a hard time explaining to my children what it was like to be hungry, to not have books, to not know that I was going to college, to not even know what college was. It's our biographies, our history, and our society that has shaped us. It's our biography, our history, and our society that are the keys to pulling others into the causes you care most about. I want to finish by turning back to that snowflake, the snowflake that each and every one of you are. And I want to finish with this question. Do you think the last snowflake that lands on the mountain before the avalanche knew it was going to lead the avalanche? Thank you.
tGELF, leading the change.